And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. This means if he can't secure a livestock from Abel, a sheep or whatever, if he couldn't secure the sacrifice from Abel, God would provide it. He would provide the sin offering at the door of the temple. That's where Cain could come and find the sacrifice he needs to provide.
And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door.
And yeah, that's what that means. And I have a few things to say here in this verse 7. The verse goes on to say,
And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him.
That means Cain will be the one if he does this. And he's the firstborn anyway, so he's supposed to be this one. Here's the thing. There is, okay, let me get, let me get my NASB out here.
It seems like in verse 7, not to kind of overmind what you're going to talk about and everything, but it seems like although God might have not had respect to Cain's offering, it seems like instead of God like saying, "Oh, Abel's the one after my heart" or something, he really, when he's talking to Cain, he's just like, "Well, hold on here, don't get too upset here. You still have a chance. We can still restore things, but you need to provide the suitable offering."
Yeah. Yeah, that's all he's saying. Yeah. It's not totally blown. Relax.
Yeah.
Yeah, his countenance fell, And and so that's what God's saying. If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? He will. If thou doest not well, a sin offering lieth at the door. That's how that should be translated. Sin. A sin offering. Whenever you see sin offering in Leviticus, it's just the word sin.
Good to know.
That's what it means. And here's the thing. In verse 7 here, I'm going to read it real quick from the NASB. And what you'll see here in the way they choose to translate this, you can see a certain interpretation they have. So check this out. In verse 7, it says, "If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it." What they're saying here is they believe that there is personification going on here. They believe the concept of sin is being personified as a serpent crouched at the door, waiting to strike. And that can't be what it means. And the reason is actually real simple. It's a common thing out there to find people reading this verse and saying there's personification here. It's real common out there, but it can't be right. And the reason is real simple. If you want to understand a word, you go to the first time it's used, and that's essential in defining that word throughout the Holy Bible. It's just a known tool of the trade. Well, this is the first use of sin, and that means it can't be a personification. You can't personify something that hasn't been defined. And I think what's being referred to here is a sin offering. And there's temple symbolism here for sure. And yeah, I wanted to make the point, though, that this is not personification. And then another point I wanted to make in the end of verse 7.
And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him.
This isn't about mastering sin in your life, which is how you'll hear these people try to preach it, that personify it. That's not what it's about. Anyone should see the similarity between this language here and the language in chapter 3 concerning the husband and the wife.
And thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee.
That final statement in Genesis 3:16, there's an absolute parallel between that and Genesis 4:7, the last part of Genesis 4:7. When you compare those two verses, you can see the parallel. That's another reason you can't personify this verse. So I just wanted to point that out. You have a sin offering referred to, and then unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. This has to do with the predominant theme the firstborn has in a family unit. They have a birthright, they receive a double portion of the inheritance, and so forth. This is just the way it was. That's referred to here in Genesis 4:7b. Is that sounding pretty good? I guess I'll move on.
Yeah, I'm not really talking too much here, but I see it too. So essentially, in chapter 4, verse 7b, God is mentioning that if he provides a sin offering, and then unto you shall be Abel's desire, and thou shalt rule over Abel, or like Cain will still maintain his right as the firstborn, is really kind of what he's saying.
Yeah, Cain thinks his future to be the one to restore things is derailed here because, his countenance has fallen because he sees that the Lord accept Abel's offering and not his. He is really distraught over that, man.
Mm-hmm.
And so in Genesis 4:7b, the end part there, he's saying, don't worry, that'll remain intact. If thou doest well, he'll be accepted. And what is insinuated here, it doesn't come out until we get into the next verse, but if thou doest well, God is telling Cain to ask his brother for a sheep here to sacrifice. He's telling him to ask Abel for the proper sacrifice so that he can carry out the sacrifice. If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. If he can't get it from Abel, then God will provide it himself. There's a reason he's saying this. It comes out in the next verse.
It definitely seems like God is alluding that, like, either you get an offering or I'll provide it for you. So he kind of, out of the process of elimination, Cain's like, well, the only place I can get an offering is from Abel.
Mm-hmm.
I see that there.
That is just naturally being suggested by God here, to ask his brother for the proper sacrifice. And we'll see why in the next verse. I'll prove it. Yeah, does that make sense though? Like, if thou doest well, he'll be accepted. If not, the Lord will provide the sacrifice for him. He'll perform it and be accepted. And the right way of things will be, and he'll have this primary role and so forth.
In all seriousness, I think it does make sense. We talked about how Cain, although he's extremely upset, God's kind of reconciling with him, like hold on, you still have a chance, and if you still do well, I'll still kind of your birthright will follow through and everything. And but it really does. It's making logical sense to me for sure. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah, so I really despise the personification translation of Genesis 4:7, I think it's awful. It's not the meaning.
Well, like many things that we've talked about, kind of understand what a certain word or phrase means is so important. Um, you know, I mean, we could go on and on. Understand that the earth is referring to like the earth, the land, the Edenic land. This is kind of another case where we need to understand that sin is really referring to sin offering. Like you said, it was referring to what was it, Exodus. You said.
Yeah, if you just do the Blue Letter Bible concordance thing on this, Genesis 4:7, sin, and then just scroll into like Leviticus, you'll see it's translated sin offering.
Gotcha. I mean, that alone, I would say, is like a sin offering lieth at the door. Just that simple understanding, you have to take it literally then.
Hmm.
Because if you just see it as sin lieth at the door, I suppose you could take that as a personification, but understand that's a sin offering lieth at the door. Well, literally, there is a sin offering lying at the door that will be provided. I see it.
Yeah. The Hebrew word here, it can mean just a sin, like that is a sin. Like you can use it to say sin, but the same word without any changes or anything, it means sin offering. So it really just depends on how it's being used in the passage that gives it away. So, here in 4:7, I see the context, it means a sin offering.
Right. Right.
I mean, the verse before it, his countenance has fallen because his offering wasn't accepted. I mean, obviously, a sin offering is in view here. Like, sin lieth at the door. That actually can't happen. Sin isn't a material object. And that's where they're like, well, it's personification, but it's not. This is the first occurrence of sin. See? So, I don't know. But I hate the personification translation there, or interpretation, I should say, there that comes through in some of the translations, like the NAS, which you shouldn't let that come through in translation, I don't think. It's just awful. I don't know. Okay, I'm getting distracted though. Okay.
That's right. Verse 8.
In verse 8, then, you can prove that in 4:7, God is basically saying, ask your brother for the proper sacrifice. If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? He's telling him, ask your brother for it. We know that in verse 8, it says,
And Cain talked with Abel his brother.
and that actually is a fractured sentence there in the Hebrew. And we can tell that a piece of text is missing here at this point. And if you look at the Septuagint, okay, if you look at the Septuagint, whatever, when you look in the Septuagint, it says this, and Cain said to Abel his brother, let us go out into the plain. So there is that extra piece of text there.
Yeah, the first part of verse 8 does seem to kind of fit a little oddly. Usually, and it came to pass as some sort of declaration at the beginning of a verse. But then I guess 8 part A just kind of fits a little funny
Mm-hmm.
now that you mentioned it.
Well, in the King James it says, and Cain talked with Abel his brother. But if you look at the Hebrew translated talked here, it doesn't mean that. It means, and Cain said to Abel his brother, and then nothing is said. And so it's a grammatical fail. It's like something's wrong.
Yeah, I was when you were before you mentioned the piece from the Septuagint. I was kind of expecting for the Septuagint to include something between with Abel his brother and it came to pass. I expected something between there, but then you provide that other piece, which was still cool and everything. Provide some insight, but that's really interesting. As I expected something between that where that semicolon is, yet we don't really, I guess, know. Is what I'm guessing.
Well, we know that it was at one time in the Hebrew, and it's been accidentally dropped because it was in there when the Jewish scholars translated the Septuagint, because it's preserved in the Septuagint. So God said, if thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted. And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, the sin offering. And Cain said to Abel, his brother, let's go to the field. Well, what was he planning, though? Was he going to just kill him? See, I think he planned on asking him for a sheep. But here's what I think happened, and this is just my speculation. It says,
And Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother, and slew him.
So I think what happened here is that Cain and Abel went out to the field, like Cain asked him, and Cain said, give me a sheep. And I think Abel said to him, sell me your birthright.
You do?